A well-equipped North Korean army swarmed across the 38th parallel to attack unprepared South Korean defenders. While the Korean Republicans fought a desperate delaying action, a United Nations police force with General Douglas MacArthur as commander-in-chief was formed. And for months, the Allies fought to keep from being driven into the sea. It's only a short haul from the rendezvous point to the target area, and down they go to blast communist installations. The fireworks start with a rocket barrage. One of the greatest peacetime spy dramas in the nation's history reaches its climax as Julius Rosenberg and Morton Sobel, convicted of revealing atomic secrets to the Russians, enter the federal building in New York to hear their doom. Another of the spy ring, Mrs. Ethel Rosenberg, who with her husband was convicted of actually transmitting the secrets to Russia through Soviet diplomatic channels. The ring was first uncovered following the arrest of Klaus Fuchland. David Greenglass, Mrs. Rosenberg's brother, confessed theft of the secrets while stationed at the Los Alamos atomic project. He later became the government's chief witness in the prosecution of Sobel and the Rosenbergs. It is a stern jurist they face in Irving Kaufman. After administering a tongue lashing in which he charged them with the indirect death of thousands of men in Korea, he sentenced both Rosenbergs to death in the electric chair and Sobel to 30 years in prison. The storm which has been brewing between Washington and General MacArthur finally breaks with the news that the Supreme Commander has been dismissed by President Truman. Members of the press leave the conference in Washington to release the world-shaking story which will affect international policy in every capital. The center of the controversy, General Douglas MacArthur, is shown at his Tokyo headquarters. Here he administered the occupation of defeated Japan and directed the defense of Korea. At the request of the United Nations, President Truman appointed him to lead the Allied powers in the fight against communism in the Far East. In Japan and at the front, he served the nation and the United Nations with unfailing vigor. His record in previous campaigns command. President Truman flew to meet with MacArthur last year, and on that occasion they discussed overall policy and apparently agreed on future conduct of the fight against red aggression. But in the final analysis, the disagreements between immediate strategy and international diplomacy resulted in General MacArthur's dismissal. At the White House, the administration, represented by the President, is seriously concerned. Mr. Truman speaks to the nation, outlining the reasons for his action regarding world policy.
I believe that we must try to limit the war to Korea for these vital reasons: to make sure that the precious lives of our fighting men are not wasted, to see that the security of our country and the free world is not needlessly jeopardized, and to prevent a third world war. A number of events have made it evident that General MacArthur did not agree with that policy. I have therefore considered it essential to relieve General MacArthur so that there would be no doubt or confusion as to the real purpose and aim of our policy. It was with the deepest personal regret that I found myself compelled to take this action. General MacArthur is one of our greatest military commanders, but the cause of world peace is much more important than any individual. The change in commands in the Far East.
Without question, the most awesome technological achievement of the decade was the atom bomb. Before the first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, even those who made it didn't realize its full power. And those who witnessed the first post-war tests on the island of Bikini couldn't know its implications.
This was the Flying Enterprise, an American freighter, after winds of hurricane force had sprung out from nowhere. The ship had taken a terrible pounding from the angry waters, until finally she had cracked under the strain. Water rushing into the hold tipped her over in a 60-degree lift. Her captain, Kurt Carlson, gave the order to abandon ship to the crew of 40 and 10 additional passengers. He staunchly refused to leave his vessel, feeling sure that he could keep her afloat until the Flying Enterprise could be towed to England. For 13 days he stayed with it, fighting the inevitable. But it was a lost cause. 41 miles off Falmouth, England, the tow cable broke, and the ship floundered over into an 80-degree lift. Carlson and the mate, Kenneth Dancy, were forced to leap overboard to save their lives. The Flying Enterprise dipped below the waves and was lost in some 40 fathoms of water.
It was a year of tragedy and mourning for Great Britain, which lost its well-loved monarch, George VI, who, despite his grave illness, continued his duties until death overtook him at the age of 56. Throughout the British Commonwealth, the Sailor King had won the hearts of his subjects, and his passing cast a pall over the empire. The late King's daughter became England's second Queen Elizabeth. Carefully reared to her responsibilities, she has already captured the affections of Britons during her short reign. Republican hopes soar with the nomination of their two new standard bearers.
Ike for president, Ike for president, Ike for president, Ike for president. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington. We don't want John or Dean or Harry, let's do that big job right. Let's get in step with the guy that's hep, get in step with Ike. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington, we'll take Ike to Washington.
Now is the time for all good Americans to come to the aid of their country.
When the ballots had been counted and the nation had spoken, General Ike rolled up a majority of 6 million votes over his Democratic opponent. After 20 years, the administration had changed hands, and the public met its new president and the incoming First Lady of the land.
A major medical hurdle was crossed with the discovery by Dr. Jonas Salk of the anti-polio vaccine, which was to spread a mantle of protection over millions of American children. And the scientist entered the ranks of the medical immortals. Leading drug firms shifted into high gear to meet a national demand, which spread to every crossroads despite early controversy. Each hastily set up center became a mecca for anxious parents shepherding little Johnny and little Jill to their inoculations. They're protected, and it didn't hurt a bit.
The climax of the ceremony has arrived, when the Archbishop gently sets this splendid emblem on the Queen's head. And the trumpet sounds.
In September 1953, they were married at St. Mary's Church in Newport, Rhode Island. 600 guests attended the wedding, which was blessed by the Pope.
This permanent subcommittee on investigations of the United States Senate, being a subcommittee of the Senate on government operations, has now convened in open session for the purpose of investigating charges heretofore made by the Secretary of the Army, Robert T. Stevens, and his counsel, John G. Adams, and formalized in a document dated April 13, 1954, and filed with this subcommittee, and in which a general charge is made that Senator Joseph R. McCarthy, as chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, United States Senate, its chief counsel, Roy M. Cohn, as well as other members of its staff, sought by improper means to obtain preferential treatment for one Private G. David Shine, United States Army, formerly a consultant for this subcommittee, and in which numerous specific allegations are made in support of that general charge.
I would like to make it very clear that there's no contest between Senator McCarthy and the Department of the Army. All that Senator McCarthy has been trying to do is expose the communists who have infiltrated the Department of the Army, a very small percentage.
Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell are welcomed by George Bowser, manager of the Fox West Coast Theaters, as they arrive to make their imprints in the famous concrete of Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. Filmden's first blonde and first brunette, Marilyn and Jane won their chance to join Filmden's immortals by their work in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, the Technicolor adaptation of the sensationally humorous musical comedy stage hit. The marriage of Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio attracts a record crowd to the San Francisco court where the ceremony is performed. Two top-flight performers living up to long-established reputations as outstanding drawing cards. Congratulations in which all movie lovers and baseball fans join. And now the pair are off for their happy honeymoon. The girl who starred in How to Marry a Millionaire giving another starring performance in How to Marry a Baseball Hero. Nice work, Marilyn, and the same to you, Joe.
I used to fly around quite a bit, you know. I took a lot of unnecessary chances on the highways. And I started racing, and now I drive on the highways, and I'm extra cautious. Because no one knows what they're doing. Half the time, you don't know what this guy's going to do with that one. On a track, there are a lot of men who spend a lot of time developing rules and ways of safety. And I find myself being very cautious on the highway. Well, Gig, I think I'd better take off.
Oh, wait a minute, Jimmy. One more question. Do you have any special advice for the young people who drive?
Take it easy driving. Life, you might say, might be mine.
I have felt all along that we are working and protesting under the aegis of the Constitution, and I feel that somewhere this conviction will be found unconstitutional. We will continue to protest in the same spirit of love and nonviolence and passive resistance. Now, I might say that that is no bitterness on my part, and certainly no bitterness on the part of the more than 40,000 Negro citizens of Montgomery. We feel that we are right and that we have a legitimate complaint, and also we feel that one of the great glories of America is the right to protest for right.
To us, as to every visitor to the Motorama, the dream cars are an exciting preview of the world of tomorrow. The racy Pontiac Bonneville Special.
On the heels of Poland's success came the pent-up fury of an oppressed people in Hungary. Almost with bare hands, patriots, joined by the Hungarian army, rose spontaneously and made a shambles of the mighty Russian tanks. For 10 days, they sent the Red Might reeling. sledges completed the work of gasoline bombs. The hated secret police, nerve center of Soviet tyranny, were rounded up and shot. Red flags were burned and religious freedom was restored with the release of Cardinal Minzetti after 7 years of imprisonment. But retribution was swift and crushing. 20 new divisions of tanks moved in. This time, shaken Kremlin leaders took no chances and rebellion turned to slaughter in the unequal struggle. It was raw courage and rifles against tanks. At least 20,000 died as the Reds ruthlessly mopped up, and beautiful Budapest became a city of rubble. Buried under the ruins were the freedom hopes of a brave people. Their dead became symbolically those of a horrified free world. Their ghostly voices were heard in the United Nations, where Red brutality was unmasked.
In Egypt, a series of riots touched off by nationalists protested the occupation by the British of the Suez Canal area and the Sudan. Many died during the violence.
Britain's first atomic power reactor at Calder Hall went critical in May 1956. The reactors at Windscale nearby went critical 6 years earlier. When a reactor goes critical, atomic energy is released safely and under complete control. But there are many sites within the Atomic Energy Authority where atomic fuel in various forms is handled outside the shielding of a reactor. In these places, criticality might conceivably occur by accident. A chain reaction would be started, just as it is in a reactor, but this time there would be no control, and a serious accident could occur.
The largest crowd in the history of Yankee Stadium turns out to hear the Reverend Dr. Billy Graham. 92,000 New Yorkers jammed the huge arena. 2,000 more were turned away on a day when the temperature reached a high for the year. Standees helped fill every inch of space in the triple-tiered stadium. This was one of the largest gatherings on record for the evangelist, surpassed only by his appearance in London's Wembley Stadium before an audience of 120,000. A high point of Billy Graham's New York crusade.
This close-up of the United States edition of Sputnik was made at a press conference with leaders of the scientific teams, Dr. Werner von Braun, Dr. James Van Allen, and Dr. William Pickering, a three-way collaboration between private industry, academic science, and the military. Jupiter C stands poised on its launching pad. The hours-long countdown approaches zero, a moment of enormous tension, for every missile launching is still an experiment. Any one of tens of thousands of things can go wrong with catastrophic results. But all that can be done to assure perfection has been done. The moment is at hand. The countdown reaches zero. Some 3 minutes later, Explorer is in orbit, broadcasting to the world its scientific data. Cosmic ray intensity, meteor impact, solar radiation. These are the dry facts that will help carry man ever farther into the age of space.
A regal cavalcade leaves the royal palace in Brussels, escorting King Baudouin to the world's fairgrounds. As ruler of the host nation, he is visitor number one, formally and practically too, for the great exposition is not officially open until the king pushes the button and brings life to the dancing fountains of the Belgian square. This lagoon and fountain, a cool and refreshing sight, draws much favorable attention, as does all the architecture. Baby trains help visitors see all there is to see, including a flock of flamingos, guests of a U.S. airline. All the nations, great and small, have done themselves proud. It's a showcase to the world, and neatly reflecting the world situation, two great pavilions loom face to face. The huge Russian structure, already nicknamed the Icebox, on which the USSR has lavished several times the American budget, and its rival, America's graceful pavilion.
You could buy a Chrysler for under $3,000. They told us news with ads like this in newspapers, magazines, direct mail. And sales of the Chrysler Newport went up 12 4/10% right here in Philadelphia.
From his stronghold in the wild Sierra Maestre Mountains, Cuba's Fidel Castro emerged triumphant after 2 years of guerrilla warfare against the Batista regime. The revolution that began with Castro a fugitive, practically alone, landing with 82 followers, to be nearly wiped out by government forces, ended with the flight of dictator Fulgencio Batista and the entry into Havana of rebel forces to be acclaimed by the city. In his lifetime, the bearded cigar-smoking idealist has become a legend. For most Cubans, this is the first glimpse of the man whose name became a byword during 25 months of guerrilla fighting. Many had no clear idea of his beliefs or his program, but knew only of his cause and his personal dedication. Now his words strike terrific enthusiasm. To his military victory, Castro has deftly added popular support, built in a matter of days by this hero's procession. Another source of power for Cuba's man of the hour. Vice President Nixon escorts Soviet Premier Khrushchev on a preview of the United States Fair at Skolniki Park in Moscow. It's the official opening of the American Exposition, counterpart of the Soviet trade show in New York, and dedicated to showcasing the high standard of life in our country.